Freak Nation, it's good to get Chris Dyson back here in the Freak Nation. He's got himself another title, and it came down earlier this year. Initial Hall of Fame inductee, Chris Dyson, multi-time sports car championship, father, the son of a hell of a sports car driver. And he's joining us now here in the Freak Nation, a recent race winner with the Trans Am Series here with the Freaks. So let's start with this whole Hall of Fame, and then we'll get into the accident, then we'll get into the latest race win. Let's start with the Hall of Fame because, yeah, you're in your late 40s, but I still think as Chris Dyson, a guy that maybe we need to wait 10 or 15 years before we put Chris Dyson and Ernie Francis Jr. of all people into a Hall of Fame. Chris Dyson.
You know, Kenny, I said to people when they've asked me about what it feels like, my career's still happening. So, in some respects, it's really kind of cool to know that you made it and you're still living, you're still healthy, you're still thriving. I think it was a tremendous way of kind of underlining the success that I've had personally, while it's still happening.
I think you're onto something there because we get so caught up in the history of a baseball player, football player, sports car driver. When you've already accomplished what you have, we don't need to wait until you retire or until you pass, Chris Dyson, to know that you're going to be a Hall of Famer.
I'm just so thankful and kind of actually in disbelief over the fact that, you know, I'm kind of on the same level as a lot of guys who are not only my heroes, but they were my dad's heroes. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I've certainly done more races than I'm going to do at this point in my career, but I think there's still some gas in the tank and there's still some mountains to climb. And I'm just still enjoying every minute of it. And just along the way to be honored in that kind of environment, it was an unbelievable feeling.
Freak Nation, Chris Dyson had a share of Trans Am titles, IMSA titles, joining us here in the Freak Nation. And I think more of a surprise to me, Chris, was that there wasn't a Trans Am Hall of Fame up until this year, given the history of the series and really the popularity within the drivers' circles of the series.
I think it's symptomatic of the sport sometimes, Kenny, to not recognize kind of the forebears, and you've got to be sort of super conscious of history, really, to be looking backwards in this game. You know, I think that it's part of the story. It's certainly one of the great draws of the sport, the generational nature of it, the fact that people are kind of weaving across age groups, but it's also a sport that's of the moment. And it's very much what are we doing today? What are we going to do next season? And because of that, I think sometimes a lot of the recording gets lost of milestones. And I'm just grateful to Tony Perella for realizing that Trans Am has a 6-decade history, and it's time to recognize the people who made it what it is.
Okay, Hall of Famer, you've made it part of what it is, talking about the Trans Am series. But you just said in a couple of answers ago, you've still got more left in the tank. You've still got more to give. What is that? Because outside of driving, you give some from just car ownership, some from just talking about the series, some from being, you know, in the media. What is Chris Dyson left to give to the sport of motorsports, to the series of Trans Am?
Well, I'd like to believe that, you know, when it's all said and done, I'll have given back as more than I've taken from the sport. And whatever shape that takes, I don't know yet, to be honest. I've got, you know, a life that's been kind of centrally organized around racing for going on 3 decades here. And it's hard to imagine what life would be like without racing. And I've got kids, like you said, that are coming along and growing up. And I really enjoy the mentoring side of the sport. And as you said, we've got, you know, involvement in sports media around racing. So I don't think there will ever be a time for me where there's not some next thing that's in this sport to go get and to go achieve.
I love you saying mentoring, because I do see that a lot in the Trans Am series, where whether it's Trans Am, the top level, or TA2, there is a lot of camaraderie and gamesmanship, people helping others throughout that sport, which is what has made Trans Am so solid over the last decade. Now, having said that, is part of this mentoring to your kids, or are they want nothing to do with it?
I don't know. We're not pushing it. I think with my sons and daughters, they really enjoy being at the races. They love the competition. it's up to them. I know that my elder son is very handy mechanically. He's really good behind the wheel when he does it. He's a tremendous athlete. And my little guy is just setting out in go-karts right now. And I know my daughters are just their own forces of nature. They're competitive athletes, but they're also really savvy. When we come to the track, they're the ones that are at the gym weed sort of sampling area, taking down what people like. So it's nice to have that mix of enterprising, sort of kids that are on their way and also young athletes.
Hold on a second. I know Kenny wanted to jump in here. I have another question though, with regard to your daughters. Do they see a little bit of what I've seen? It was difficult for women to get involved in the sport 30 some odd years ago. It's gradually gotten better and better. I feel like over the last 3 to 4 years, it's become a lot better, seeing more women in the sport. Just this weekend at Indianapolis, I'm seeing female doctors being interviewed. I'm seeing female team owners. I'm seeing there's lots of aspects. Do your daughters feel that same way? They're over there in product sampling. That's a business-minded way of getting into the sport. Do you think they see that as well?
I don't know if they're conscious of it. And I think it's because they're growing up in a world where it's not as much of a thing for females to be integrated in the whole arrangement of everything. And I think that, we see it through our own lens where, yeah, that's a cool thing. And it's a big deal, but for them, and I think this is a credit and shows the evolution, whether it's sort of gender or racial integration, the less the younger kids are even thinking that way, the more successful you are with what you're doing.
Oh my God, nailed it.
Yeah.
That's so true. Because our daughter doesn't see it as much. So it's more on our minds than it is our daughter. So yeah, you nailed it with that.
Chris Dyson, multi-time sports car champion, joining us here in the Freak Nation, part of the inaugural class Trans Am Hall of Famer, back in a race car after a pretty gnarly accident in Sebring, joining us here in the Freak Nation. I want to get to that momentarily, but in this conversation, reminded me of, as we watched Indy 500 qualifying, got Graham Rahal, who continues to fight a car, and some are questioning his moves on the track with letting up on the gas a little bit too early or too much. Then you've got Scott McLaughlin, who wrecks his car in practice. The big picture here for me, Chris, for you is, when I had my daughter, I had no desires to go out and get that other motorcycle or to take risks in cars or risks with certain sports, because now it's all about her. You at 47 years old, you have children on their way to success. You can't tell me that hasn't affected you in a race car, knowing that you've got little Dysons outside this car that need their dad, right?
I think I might be the first person to be intervened on Freak Nation here. I'm sorry about that, Kenny. No, I have to say, I had my son when I was 30. I was at that point kind of established and racing, and still had a lot more I felt like to do in the sport. I have a supportive partner. My wife has been with me the whole way, and I think with the children, I think if you're thinking about what could happen, whether it's with kids in mind or with business in mind, you probably shouldn't be doing it, because if you're starting to kind of worry about those things, you got to remember the guys you're competing against, they aren't. I think that there's this weird fine line between kind of being careful and being worried. And I think those are two different things. And I've always been kind of in the car owner game. So, you're always worried about the equipment and by extension yourself. So that's kind of been its own restrainer on me the whole time. But I think also too, Kenny, I think it's made me do, having children, was it just made me focus, right? Because if you're doing it and you're taking the time away from them and you're going to be on the road and you're going to be missing, you better do a damn good job. And you better try to be as impeccable as you can with your preparation, because what you're not doing when you're racing is you're not spending time with them. And what I'm grateful for is that I think my kids recognize that a lot of those sacrifices that were made for their dad to be an athlete, and the amount of times I had to be away from stuff that they were doing, it paid off in success. I think it helped show them what success path looked like. And that's hopefully the lesson I got across to them, because I still feel very close with them. And I think in point of fact, what racing does for me is it pushes my brain to a different level. It kind of ticks all the boxes competitive for me that I need, that there's nothing in life that can do that. And I think it makes me, when I come back home, a lot more grateful for everything else I've got. And I think it increases the quality of time I get with them.
And
Wow.
again, like you said, the reason I brought up Scott McLaughlin, he's got a child. Graham Rahal has children. And you go to that accident with you at Sebring, where you're out of the car and you got to get Maddie Brabs in the car. Are you thinking about your kids immediately after that accident as you're getting out of the car and what this means to them seeing their dad in pain?
Well, it was interesting about that because they were all there, because that was the weekend of the Hall of Fame ceremony. And it was such a fluke freak accident that I think there was a lot of time that I was sort of processing it, that I couldn't really deal with anything other than what happened with the car, right? And physically, am I okay? And thankfully, like, we were able to solve both of those things. But what was difficult was actually like being home and my body not snapping back. You know, normally, like, you have a wreck, and I think this is something that as a young driver, you don't think about, even if you have a big wreck. And I've had several. Your body recovers. This was one of these times, though, where it wasn't. And unlike previous times where I was like strong-willed enough and kind of really like, kind of frankly, just single-minded, this was not happening in a way, the recovery wasn't happening in a way where I saw a clear pathway back. And I think it wasn't just for the kids, it was like, it was kind of for everything, right? Because, you know, I have business interests outside of racing, and, you know, whether, you know, I think you're threading the needle when you're in this sport between responsibility and kind of just raw edge competition. And that's fine as long as you don't get hurt. And that's the kind of gamble you're always taking, whether you're 24 and single or 47 with 4 kids. But you've got to know every time you get in the car that risk is always the same. The physics are always the same. So, you know, for me, there was a lot of reflection during about a month and a half of time where my body wasn't getting healthy. And, you know, I think I wasn't really worried about driving. I just wanted to get better. I just wanted my body to get better. And then when it did, it was like, okay, this is realistic. Maybe we should give this a shot again and see.
Oh, wow.
Yep.
Yeah. Don't we love aging? I mean, I'm in my 50s, so I get it. But dang, as you said you were reflecting for about a month and a half, was it constant reflections with yourself and your wife, or were you talking to doctors on, hey, what different therapies can I experiment with? Red light therapy, cold therapy. What was that month and a half like?
It was kind of like, I think it was about teaching me a lesson in patience, which I've not been very good at. I've not ever been very good at. And it was, you know, I think it was also a time too, I'd lost some family members. So I think sometimes like you get these moments where you're kind of forced to be in a situation. That's what I looked at. There was a message that I was being given to take. And for me, it was just to sit there and deal with the fact that some people really important to me had moved on, to be grateful for everything that not only they'd given me, but just everything I'd done up to that point. And, you know, if I wasn't going to be in a position where my body was going to heal, at least I knew up to that point that I'd had a great run. And I can't say that I seriously sat there and said, you know, I'm done racing. I wasn't scared. I was more just kind of frustrated and annoyed. And I think sometimes when you can't go to the gym and all of those kind of pathways you would go down to normally just get your mind reset, it kind of forced me to dig deeper and kind of find different levels of dealing with things. I think that was actually really helpful.
Well, wins.
A lot of lessons in this interview.
Wins.
We always go deep. We always go deep for some reason.
Kids, pay attention.
You guys bring out the best, I guess.
Well, I was about to say race wins, especially the legendary track of Laguna Seca, can certainly hold on a second. What's the saying? what is it? The
Heal what ails you.
Heal what ails you. And with that race win at Laguna Seca, that was a pretty big bandage or a pretty big shot in the arm for you, a guy that is used to running for championships. Was that an expected win? It's a loaded question. Was that an expected win for you to come back like that and kick some ass?
I was honestly, Kenny, I wasn't expecting much from myself, to be honest. You got to understand something. Like up till about literally like a week before we went to Sonoma, I was not planning on driving. Like I was still feeling like, and this isn't making it up to like create some kind of mythos, right? Like I was legitimately like concerned, like, am I going to be able to get in the car again? And when I got an MRI and the results came back negative, and I got in the car and did a test, having not trained at all for like 5-6 weeks. And I'm like, okay, the only hindrance now is your will and your body. And I basically said, okay, we're going to do everything. I caught my trainer, Shane, who I've worked with since I started. And I said, look, dude, we've got to make up for 5 weeks in like 10 days. And we just pushed. We just basically just went back to the grindstone. And at the whole time, you're like, I hope this is enough. I hope this is enough to at least build a little bridge to what we need to do in Sonoma. And, you know, Sonoma is a very, very demanding place. And I was really pleased because we went out there and not only did we survive, but it was a race-long fight and we damn near won it. And that felt like a win. And, you know, some guys were saying, oh, you must be disappointed. It's like, dude, I am just happy to be out here. And I know that's like, sounds like a cliche, but like, I'm serious. Because when you don't think you're going to be able to get behind the wheel again, or you don't have a time frame, all of a sudden those expectations, those demands that you would normally put yourself under, and, you know, you think that's the expectation, that stuff disappears. And you're just happy to get in the car and just go out and compete again. And when I went to when I went up to Laguna, we had the benefit from, I'd been there before, car was pretty good, and it was a short weekend. So I felt like I had a little bit of kind of margin, but you still had to go out and prove it. And thankfully we were able to bring it across. And I felt so pumped afterwards because not that it was a race win, but it was kind of like the end of what I thought was a really interesting kind of journey through the winter that we had to take.
Chris, can you share with me, or it might be just personal, what were some of the bumps and bruises that you had? Because it didn't even dawn on me how tough Sonoma is. Any part of your body is bruised. What a sports car can do to those bruises and magnify could be brutal.
Well, I think for me, Kenny, it was more than anything else, it's just the muscle stamina. Yeah. And, you know, of all the places you could pick to go as kind of the sort of return, Sonoma's not an easy place to jump into. And I'll tell you why. It's not because it's just corner to corner, because Mid-Ohio's like that. There's some certain tracks that are just unstinting. Sonoma, though, has got really long corners. And the one thing that even when you're super fit, that's the hardest thing to prepare for is long duration holds on your body. And, you know, the carousel, right? The S's, turn one there. There's these long corners where it's not super peak G in a TI car, but it's what I call long G. And that was just, I was happy when I looked over at Paul Menard and I said, how you feeling? He's like, man, I'm shot. And he had just won, and he didn't go through a wreck. So, yeah, but I think more than anything else, it was just muscle pulls and rest and a little bit of atrophy, Kenny. And I think it was just basically saying, all right, it's time to go.
Whoa. Well, I'm looking at this field points. You've got Menard, of course, sitting at the top with 393 points. And there's some of our favorite drivers are in the top 5, top 6. You got you, Dreesy at 3, Amy Ruman at 4, of course, you at 6, Britt Cruz right behind you. Realistically, do you have a shot at the championship?
You know, I don't know. Something's going to have to happen to Paul or, you know, the guys or Adam. They're putting together really nice seasons and they're competitive and they're scoring every weekend. You know, I missed a weekend. I think at this point, the show that we're in is race wins. And I think there's an outside chance we may be able to win the team championship because we did score pretty well at Atlanta. And my teammate Hamed finished in the top 5 at Sebring. So that's one we haven't really done the math for. But I'd be kidding you if I thought I could win the championship right now. I think at this point, I'm just really excited to be able to go out and run for race wins. And that's what we're going to be trying to do at Lime Rock next weekend.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you alluded to that several times in this interview. The victory has already come. You getting back on the track, feeling good, and being able to make a pretty quick recovery and get over that muscle atrophy and get back to business. So yeah, that should be commended right there. It also goes into this conversation that we are having in seemingly all motorsports right now of the domination of one specific driver does not mean that the series is going to hell in a handbasket. You can respect greatness while somebody might be running away with a season, but there's so many other incredibly talented drivers right behind them fighting for their own sense of glory in each season. So fans need to recognize that as well.
Absolutely. And I think that there's storylines wherever you look in a racing paddock, and you've just got to walk around and just start asking questions to realize that there's a lot on the line for everybody who's there, regardless of how anybody's doing. It's all the great pursuit. I think a lot of it is it's the results, and that's what we're here for, but it's also the process to get those results. And it does sound like a cliche to say that we're just happy to be here because the reason for being is to win races and championships, but you do realize like how lucky we are to all be doing this. And I think it's easy to, when you're in this world of tenths and hundredths, to sometimes take a step back and say, look, man, what are we actually doing here? And we're really privileged. And what I'm excited about is people are telling those stories right now. And I know we're trying to do that every day at Racer and on the Racer Network. And you guys are doing such a great job of trying to bring the stories and the human element behind it all to play, because I think that's where that's why we're all there. It's because of the passion, and it's because everybody loves being there.
Without question.
Freak Nation, without getting too much into the weeds on this, I'm going to ask Chris Dyson another question that he's got to come hard with. All right, Chris, you got your top three. Chris and I talked about the history of radio, and Chris and I know each other's history briefly out of discussion of Chris hanging out in the studio as his family was owning a crap ton of stations up in the Northeast. But Hair Nation and heavy metal and so forth came. I went, oh my God, there's another reason I like Dyson, man. All right, so your top three hair metal bands are, Chris Dyson. Come on, you got to give me something.
Oh, hair metal.
Or metal, just metal bands from the 80s. All right.
Yeah, I mean, look, you got to say Judas Priest. Yes. You got to say Metallica. If you're just going to go for kind of the regular, you got to put Van Halen in there too.
Yeah.
All right.
Just for sheer virtuosity, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So Kenny doesn't get starstruck much at all, if ever, except when Rob Halford came in our studio. Rob Halford of Judas Priest, maybe 10 years ago. Kenny was silent for a few minutes, and it was something to witness. Let's put it that way.
Hey, Dyson, when Rob Halford sends you a video message saying happy 60th birthday.
That's true too. Yep.
What am I to do, my friend?
I think you just smile, Kenny, and just say we are united by rock and roll. Racing is rock and roll. Don't let anybody fool you. This is not cancer research, thank God. This is rock and roll. This is kick ass. Have a blast. Let it rip. For me, racing and radio and music was all connected, and it still continues to be.
Man, there are like 2 or 3 quotes to put on a T-shirt right there. I might just take that test.
I'm here all weekend. Call me whenever you're having a slow day, buddy.
Well, CD, Sundays I know are special for you and your family. Thank you for taking time out to join us here in the Freak Nation, buddy. We'll be talking to you again this season. All right.
Yeah, great to be back, guys. We'll try to be frequent flyers this year.